now I'm gonna drive the conversation a little towards politics.
Sure.
So I come from a country where propaganda is the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see what's happening, let's say in Russia now, I'm not sure what to believe. You know, I've seen the documentary that Navalny put out. I've sort of tried to study what's happening actually within the high ranks of the sort of Russian government and the oligarchy, but I don't necessarily know what to believe. And I think you are probably the best person I have in my network to ask about this. What is happening in Russia and what's the future like?
Look, I have the same issue as you mentioned, and I'm not an insider, and now okay, I don't live there also anymore, so I can, let's say, as an interested citizen or human, I can just give my view there. I mean, I'm fascinated by this country and its people. I lived there for 14 years. Some of the most warm and wonderful people I've ever met. And once you become like part of their group, of their society, which is not so difficult, they're not closed. They're really, really warm, very open, very honest. So, I mean, really, really unique and wonderful people, and very, very, you know, from the heart and soul. Incredibly talented. I mean, I have like the capabilities people have there, whether it's entrepreneurial, whether it's technical. Amazing people, and you see how many companies, startups, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in the US, anywhere, are basically created by Russians. And you know, at the same time, you have a country which has certain traditions, and certain, let's say, sensitive areas, like every country. I remember, for example, in Germany, inflation is a very sensitive topic. So when inflation goes a few percentage points up, it's like a kind of topic. And this is still from, I wouldn't go that far to call it a national trauma, but it is something which is still from the time of the Great Depression in the 30s with hyperinflation. But there's still this fear, okay, we don't want this ever again. That, you know, I mean, the value of money within seconds just disappears. So, you know, that's what I mean. There is always some national specifics you have to know. What I learned with a lot of people in Russia, there's a high value for stability and security. And looking at the last 40, 50, 60 years of the country, not really a surprise. I mean, there were smaller ups and downs, larger ups and downs, I mean, literally every couple of years, where people either lost their savings, or they got into half, or there was something else where permanently some external factors came and basically made it very difficult for people to live in some way a certain continuous, more or less stable life.
This is after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yes, if you look, 98 in August, the Russian government declared default. The years before, under the years under Yeltsin, very difficult years, hyperinflation, the new ruble. There was the economic plan, which led to a lot of bankruptcies and literally the government being bankrupt, having no money. No new tax system yet which worked. In the Soviet Union, there was a very good, and everybody was taken care of in the healthcare system there. Struggled with that, many struggles, and not all of those struggles, or let's say revolutions or inconsistencies, or economic challenges, were always reported back into the West. But for people, it was basically every 2-3 years something awful happened. So the notion of having some stability and some security and being able to live in a normal way and earn some money and build a life is super important to lots of people. Super important. As this was not there. I had actually this question in my mind for quite some time, and I asked a couple of, I think it was like 100 young people. I thought I want to make a bit of a study there. Whether they would be willing to sacrifice freedom and knowing that, for example, politicians and some oligarchs have some connections with each other, so it's not completely free from both sides. So freedom of press, knowing such things, freedom of speech, of everything. If there would be a trade-off between having lesser of these freedoms, but not compromising on stability and security, what would you choose? The answer for more than 85%, it's a few years ago when I asked this, was for sure, I don't want to sacrifice on security and stability. And these were young people. And this gives you an idea how important it is to them. You know, let me have, what does this mean, stability? Let me have a life planning horizon which is more than a week or a month or a year. So this is what, as I understood, really matters to people. That there is a certain predictability of how things will develop. And that is very much ingrained and very understandable, as I felt and feel looking at what Russia and before the Soviet Union went through. And by the way, which you can also see in a couple of the neighboring countries who do not have this, where it's more unstable. So there's a high value there.
Are you referencing Belarus specifically, or?
No, I would literally every other of these countries. If you look at the Stan countries like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, they all had their ups and downs, their uncertainties. The Caucasian countries, well, recently Belarus, but that's on one page. On the other page, of course, there is a desire and an increasing desire to move into a system which, and that is the conflict, which would allow for more transparency, for more democratic grassroots involvement, and ideally with no compromise on stability. And that is the struggle. Because this is usually very, very difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. Every change in the system will always bring in some instability. And that is the struggle there. In as I see it again now from the outside, which, by the way, if you look historically, and from the West, we should not be arrogant there. If you look historically, is a very common development in societies That's how all societies, which now call themselves or live in a parliamentary democracy, this is how all of these countries have come to this. They were in similar situations. Then there were struggles. Then there were some types of turmoil, sometimes government change, sometimes a coup, sometimes other activities, and it brought them step by step into a different system. So it is not such an unusual struggle we watch. I sometimes get the impression when I read the press as if, this is like, oh wow, I mean, all the countries developed like that, and now there's suddenly this country, Russia, and they develop so differently to others. Not at all. You look at the US, 18th, 19th century, how they from a country where, a couple of, how would I call them? Well, in the modern context, one would probably call them oligarchs, were running the country and businesses, and there was like more and more the need for aligning with some rules, and they had monopolies. They were not very good to their workers, and slowly they developed into a different type of society. So this was a long, long process. And there, if you look at the breakdown of the Soviet Union, which was 30 years ago just, that's no time for a nation. So that's why there is a certain development which is about to happen and which will happen, but it'll take time. And, let us always be, I would really wish everyone, also in Russia, the life and the freedoms I have. I don't know, really don't know, whether everyone would want it again in the same way again, if the price would be to have some lesser stability and security. I'm not sure. The answers I got were no. We rather compromise a bit on freedom, but we don't want to lose what we have now in terms of a certain predictability of life. And I have to respect this.
But does Putin's government provide that for everyone, that stability and that security?
Look, let's say for a vast majority, it does. For a vast majority, as they perceive it, it does. And I have lots of sympathy also. I mean, for all activities, for what is happening in terms of having more liberty, in terms of having more like individual rights and becoming more democratic. But again, as I say this as an outsider, it's really important that inside the country people say, how quickly do I want it? Do I want it? If yes, how quickly do I want it? And what am I ready to give up for that? And look, many Russians still remember how the Soviet Union broke down, how Yeltsin then took over, how Russia was created, all the instability, how the building of the government, the White House was in Moscow, was basically shot with tanks. This was 30 years ago.
The Kremlin was shot?
No, this is the president place. The government seat is usually in the White House, as they call it, where all the prime minister and the ministers usually sit. So this has been not so long ago, and people remember this. And